Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Michael Carter always believed that success was made of daily choices, not luck. Since his early 20s, when he decided to start his own business, he woke up early, solved problems that weren't even his, visited clients in person, and cleaned the factory floor if needed. And over 15 years, that worked out. The Carwin Industries became a reference in the industrial equipment sector, employed hundreds of people, and generated real impact. But more than the company, Michael was proud of who was by his side: Vanessa, his wife for 12 years, and Derek, his friend since college days, someone who was there when Michael was still dreaming about a small warehouse and half a dozen machines. Alongside Derek, Michael shared important decisions, honest conversations, and even the moments when he thought everything could fall apart. Derek was the CEO and had the freedom to manage the operations. Vanessa, on the other hand, never got too involved with the business, but she was present at celebrations, corporate events, and award trips. Michael liked to think that his life was stable, solid. He had built everything through effort. And he really believed that he was admired for it. He trusted Derek like a brother. Vanessa was his home. The peace point when the world outside demanded too much. That specific week, Michael had to travel for a supplier meeting in another state. 3 days of meetings, business dinners, and little rest. But on the second day, a call changed his plans. One of the suppliers cancelled, the main meeting was postponed. He could take advantage of it to rest, but he decided to catch the first flight back. He wanted a night at home, his own bed, a quiet dinner. He arrived around 8 at night, opened the house door quietly, trying to surprise Vanessa with flowers he bought at the airport. What he saw, however, froze his body. The bouquet fell from his hands. On the living room sofa, the woman he loved and the man he trusted most were together, too close for any plausible explanation. The two froze for a second. Vanessa immediately stood up and started babbling something Michael couldn't process. Derek ran his hand over his face and tried to leave the house, as if that would erase everything. Michael didn't shout. Didn't break anything. Just looked at the two of them and felt his chest tighten as if being crushed from within. He went upstairs, left his phone on the dresser, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the floor for long minutes. It was there that he realized, he had lost much more than a wife and a friend. He had lost the illusion of security. In the following days, everything turned into a blur of papers, lawyer meetings, and dry sentences spoken in a cold tone. Vanessa claimed the relationship was already worn out and that she deserved to be happy. Derek didn't have the courage to say much. Michael just listened. He discovered, with the documents in hand, that the no-fault divorce law in the state allowed Vanessa to receive half of the shares he had in the company. And since Derek already owned a considerable part of the board, the pair could legally take control of the Carwin Industries. Even in the face of this, Michael didn't fight. Didn't ask for review or prolong the process. He only required that the base employees had their guarantees maintained, as a way to preserve what really mattered to him. And he included a final clause: Vanessa could never ask for any other benefits, whether alimony or future division of assets. She accepted and signed with a discreet smile. She thought she had won. Derek also seemed satisfied. The company was theirs. Michael was out. For everyone around, he was the man who lost everything: the marriage, the friendship, and the business he spent years building. But for those who know well the nature of silence, they knew there was still something coming. Something neither Vanessa nor Derek were prepared to face. Michael didn't give interviews, didn't confide in anyone, didn't appear at business events, and didn't feel the need to explain what had happened. For weeks, he went unnoticed by everyone. He seemed resigned to the public. But behind that silence, there was calculation, strategy, and something few expected from him: patience. He knew very well what he had built. Every screw, every process, every product leaving the Carwin carried his signature in some way. But there was one detail: almost invisible in all of that, which would completely change the course of the story. Years before marrying Vanessa, when the company was still in its early stages, Michael had created a separate holding called Carter Holdings. At the time, his intention was to protect the most important assets of the Carwin, the patents. Over the years, all manufacturing rights, designs, and technologies were registered under that name. He never disclosed this publicly. Neither Vanessa nor Derek knew. To most, the patents belonged to the Carwin Industries. But legally, they belonged to another entity, and that entity was entirely under Michael's control, with documents filed, contracts registered, and validity renewed each fiscal cycle. Nothing about it was recent. Everything had been planned far in advance, out of precaution, instinct. And now, that detail would be the turning point. At the final meeting, where he would officially hand over the remaining shares and sign his complete disengagement from the company, Michael entered the room as a defeated man. At least, that's what everyone thought. Vanessa's lawyers were smiling, ready to file the documents. Derek barely looked him in the eye but still tried to maintain a look of superiority. Michael signed the last paper, pushed the folder toward the mediator, and stayed silent for a few seconds. Then he pulled a smaller envelope from his coat and placed it on the table. He said only, "Before ending, I need to announce a decision from the Carter Holdings." One of the lawyers frowned and asked what it was. Michael replied firmly, the Carter Holdings would revoke all licensing contracts of patents with the Carwin Industries. The official notice had already been filed. The company had 30 days to stop production, sales, and distribution of all products based on the registered technologies. The room stopped. Vanessa's smile froze on her face. Derek paled. One of the lawyers began flipping through papers in desperation while another pulled out the laptop trying to confirm the information. Michael remained seated, calm. He explained that the Carwin, from the end of that period, would no longer have legal permission to operate. Not produce. Not sell. The company, without the patents, had no use. It was like a car factory without the right to use wheels. And the most important thing, the revocation was definitive. Irreversible. Even if they tried to renegotiate, the time necessary to restore the contracts would exceed the payment deadlines for the loans taken by the company after the divorce. What Vanessa and Derek had inherited was an empty structure, without product, without usage rights, and with heavy debts about to come due. One of the lawyers tried to raise the possibility that this could be contested in court, but Michael had already prepared everything. The documentation was backed by clauses signed long before the marriage with Vanessa. The Carter Holdings existed before the foundation of the Carwin. It was a separate entity, protected, registered under his name since the first year of activity. There was no gap. No technical error. Only a silent plan that now dropped like a bomb in the lap of the traitors. Michael stood up, took his things, and left the room without rushing. As he walked down the corridor of the headquarters he himself designed, he saw employees looking curiously. Some smiled, others whispered. He just kept moving forward. With every step, he left behind a part of what he used to be. The company still carried the name Carwin, but its spirit had just departed. And Michael, the man everyone judged defeated, had just turned the game with a move no one saw coming. The news spread like wildfire. Within hours, the entire industry was commenting on the legal setback that Vanessa and Derek had suffered. First came the calls from banks asking for clarifications about the contracts and payment deadlines. Then, the minority shareholders themselves began pressuring for answers. Within a week, everything that seemed solid began to fall apart. Suppliers suspended deliveries, buyers canceled orders, and the sales team started being let go. Without legally authorized products to manufacture, no prospect of revenue, and with heavy debts accumulated to finance the purchase of shares, the castle built on ambition was crumbling fast. Derek started sleeping in the office, trying to find any solution. He called lawyers, analysts, and even a former Carwin director who had been fired by him the previous year. He was willing to listen to anyone who offered a light, no matter how small. Vanessa, on the other hand, dove into crisis meetings with the banks, trying to renegotiate deadlines and hide the extent of the problem from the public. In one of the meetings, when she learned that one of the main investors demanded the return of capital before the contractual deadline, she froze. She realized time was against them. And more than that, the market already knew what was happening. The media began speculating. A digital magazine published an article titled, "Did Michael Carter leave or was he kicked out?" In the content, they suggested that his fall might have been part of a dirtier plan than it seemed. But the public, reading the comments, reacted differently than expected. Many began pointing out Derek's suspicious rapid rise to power. Others remembered Vanessa's cold smile at an international conference just days after the divorce. And one of the most shared videos on social media was from an ex-employee of the Carwin, who had been fired shortly before Michael left. This woman, named Jill, was a machine operator and a single mother of 2 children. She told, with tears in her eyes, that Michael, upon learning of her firing, made sure her severance was paid immediately, in person, and even recommended her for a new job at another company. Jill said she would never forget that and that, despite losing her job, she felt more gratitude for him than for any executive still there. The video went viral. Not only because of the testimony, but because there the public began to see who the man truly was who had been removed from his own company. The impact was so big that sponsors started pulling away from the Carwin. An important client from the automotive sector broke the supply contract. Another, from the naval sector, issued a public statement saying they would only resume negotiations with the brand after deep revisions in its ethical structure. Derek tried to put out fires, but each attempt was a failure. Vanessa, cornered, resorted to personal loans to cover domestic expenses. She tried to sell a property she had bought during the marriage, but discovered that, due to clauses in the agreement, the property was frozen due to litigation. And even those who still had some connection with the company started jumping ship before everything collapsed completely. The lawyers tried to sue the Carter Holdings, but quickly realized they were wasting time. The legal protection Michael had set up was proof of gaps. Everything had been signed, renewed, filed flawlessly. No clause had been violated. And once again, the two found themselves powerless before a detail they had ignored purely out of arrogance. They thought Michael was just an innocent engineer, too technical, unaccustomed to the backstage game. But they were wrong. He was strategic, discreet, and had something the two had lost along the way, respect for their own principles. While Vanessa tried to control the media narrative and Derek dealt with furious investor pressure, the two's assets shrank day by day. The luxury cars were sold. The trips cancelled. The lifestyle, once a reason for ostentation, now seemed like a prison hard to maintain. And with each new news of imminent bankruptcy, Michael's name resurfaced. And this time, not as the cheated businessman or betrayed husband, but as the man who acted with justice and knew how to wait for the right time to show that character is worth more than any contract. Not long after the downfall of the Carwin, while newspapers still featured headlines about the lawsuits Derek faced and Vanessa's public exposure, Michael began acting with a silent but relentless purpose. The machines of the old company were being auctioned off for symbolic prices. The physical structure, once valued in millions, was now being sold for cents compared to its original value. Many avoided the auctions out of fear of associating with a ruined brand. Michael, on the contrary, attended each one discreetly. He bought piece by piece, sector by sector, always through legal representatives to avoid drawing too much attention. In 2 months, he had recovered much of the old factory. With less than half of what he received in the divorce agreement, he was building something new. This time, with another name. Carter Manufacturing. The restructuring began without fanfare. Michael avoided grand announcements. He preferred to start with the essentials, the people. He reached out to old colleagues, many of whom had been fired or had stepped away when Vanessa and Derek took over. Some, skeptical, hesitated at first. But it took only the first conversation for trust to return. Bill Dorsey, who had operated hydraulic presses at the Carwin for more than 10 years, was the first to accept the invitation. He said working with Michael was different because he listened. He remembered birthdays, knew the names of the employees' children, and was the kind of boss who grabbed the blueprint and climbed onto the production line if people were missing. Day by day, more and more former employees showed up. Some brought resumes. Others, just hope. Michael talked to everyone. There were no grand promises. He made it clear the beginning would be tough. The factory needed to be rebuilt, the contracts renegotiated from scratch, and the market still carried the ghost of the previous crisis. But still, they came back. One by one. Even those who had once believed in Derek's promises and, out of misguided loyalty, had distanced themselves from Michael during the transition process. He welcomed them back. No demands. No resentment. Just work. Parallel to this, Michael began reorganizing the patents. He adjusted the registrations of the Carter holdings to transfer the usage licenses directly to the new company, eliminating any link to the past. The name Carter Manufacturing began to appear at small industrial fairs, modest but promising meetings. He didn't rush. He had a method. And with each completed step, he rebuilt more than a factory, he rebuilt the confidence of those who had been trampled by the greed of two traitors. During a lunch among the employees, Michael was interrupted by spontaneous applause. Without warning, some of the former workers started clapping on the table, applauding discreetly the return of something many thought would never happen again. It was a mix of gratitude and respect. A simple gesture, but full of meaning. Michael just smiled, touched. That moment wasn't about status, profits, or position. It was about reconstruction. About looking into the eyes of those who had gone through the same cuts, the same uncertainties, and saying, "We're back. And we're together." In just a few months, the sectors showed clear signs of recovery. The reconditioned machines were running again, the packaging bore the new name proudly, and the orders began to arrive. A technical supervisor named Leonard, who had been fired in the previous management after 20 years of work, became the production manager and cared for the team as if protecting something sacred. He told Michael, in a private conversation, that he never wanted to leave there again. That it was more than a job for him. It was a personal rebirth. Each employee hired back brought with them a story. A woman in logistics had gone through 2 unstable jobs after the closure of the old factory and cried when she received her first regular paycheck in months. A forklift operator said he was thinking of moving to another state before receiving the call back. A young technician fresh out of college, who had never personally met Michael during the Carwin era, said he was proud to be there because he had grown up hearing his father talk about him as a leadership example. These small stories intertwined, giving life to the new chapter of the company. When he saw the sectors gaining momentum, the uniforms being delivered, and the first batch ready for shipment, Michael felt a hard-to-describe sensation. It wasn't euphoria, nor a personal trophy. It was a kind of inner silence. A deep relief. He knew he wasn't the same man as before, and perhaps that was the greatest triumph. He had learned that real strength isn't in who shouts the loudest, but in who remains firm while everything falls apart and still chooses to rise with dignity. The Carter Manufacturing wasn't just a rebuilt company. It was proof that doing the right thing, even when it costs, is still worth it. The Carter Manufacturing was growing strong. Contracts were coming in, former employees were motivated, and the company was beginning to regain its place in the market. Michael remained focused. Working in silence, structuring each sector carefully. When a group of foreign investors offered $1 million proposal to buy part of the company, he refused without much thought. He said what he was building was personal. And that certain things don't have a price. Meanwhile, Vanessa and Derek sank. They lost properties, cars, prestige, and credibility. Derek became the target of investigations for irregular financial movements during his management. Vanessa tried to open a consultancy, but nobody wanted to do business with her. They were forgotten by everyone who once flattered them and were now surrounded only by the consequences of their own actions. One day, Michael received a letter written by hand. It was from Vanessa. The plain envelope, with no visible sender, arrived via the company receptionist. In the letter, she said she had spent the last months reflecting on everything. Admitted she messed up with him, made impulsive decisions, and hurt someone who only tried to do right. Said she didn't expect forgiveness, but needed to apologize before going away. Told him she would leave the country and try to rebuild her life elsewhere, far from anything that reminded her of what she did. Michael read each line calmly. Folded the paper, put it in the drawer, and continued his day as always. He didn't comment to anyone. For him, that letter was the definitive end of a story that had already ended long ago. He didn't feel anger or relief. He felt distance. Like that woman, now repentant, was just an old memory, with no more connection to the life he was building. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.